This is the land of poverty, disease, crime, AIDS, and death. There's no way you would want to live there. You wouldn't survive a week in such a terrible place. Because it's a backwater continent with little technology, and the land is ravaged by war, wild animals, and hostile people who look mean. Sorry, wrong videos and images. That's right, this is what I'm looking for. The Dark Continent. I guess by now you know the place I'm talking about. It's none other than the African continent. You might be wondering where all those images and videos I showed earlier are from. Well, let me tell you, they are not from Africa. Those images are from Europe and America. Isn't it surprising that you hardly see any of those images and videos on Western news channels? They always portray their countries in a good light, but when it comes to the rest of the world, mostly Africa, this is what they choose to show. Yes, this has played a big role in how people from the Western world see us, but there are always two sides to every story. While this part of Europe and America is true, this part is also true. And vice versa. This is Africa, and this is also Africa. You may be wondering, what image do the negative portrayal of Africa actually convey? Is there no positive aspect to Africa? Who benefits from stereotyping the entire African continent, and what do they gain from it? Or is it purely driven by racism? These are lots of questions, so I'll try and answer them one at a time in this video. So make sure you stick around to the end to get the answers. And like always, make sure you subscribe to this channel for more amazing content. Thank you. So, what message do the negative portrayal of Africa actually convey? To begin with, Africa is an incredibly rich and diverse continent. It comprises 54 countries, each with its own rich tapestry of indigenous tribes and unique African historical narratives. Just imagine the multitude of cultures, histories, and accomplishments being disregarded and overshadowed by the notion that you were primitive, uneducated, lacking intelligence, and incapable of making decisions for yourself. This distorted image is being projected to the rest of the world, reaching people who have never had the opportunity to meet an African in person. What would the first impression be when those people do get to meet an African in person? It is likely that they would make the assumptions about them being primitive, uneducated, lacking intelligence, and incapable of making decisions for themselves. In essence, they would perceive themselves as superior to Africans. This is what billions of Africans have to deal with whenever foreigners come to their country. The majority of media coverage Africa receives tend to depict it as a backwater continent that is constantly reliant on assistance. This portrayal has two significant impacts on Africa. Firstly, it consistently underestimates African contributions to human civilization, often attributing them to other races. This may stem from the disbelief or reluctance to acknowledge the significant role Africans have played in shaping human civilization as we know it. Secondly, in modern times, African achievements are frequently disregarded due to the prevailing assumptions that nothing positive originates from Africa. This mindset persists among individuals who are unwilling to acknowledge the creativity and industriousness of Africans, thereby denying them the recognition they deserve alongside the rest of the world. Which brings me to the second question. Is there no positive aspect to Africa? Negative media coverage of Africa does more than make people think that the people there are poor and weak. It also makes it hard for African businesses, innovations, and technological advances to grow and get noticed. When Western news outlets mostly talk about war, famine, death, and disease when talking about Africa, they add to the idea that Africa is a place that needs help all the time. This has helped cement the phrase, "children are starving in Africa," into the minds of non-Africans for decades. This portrayal not only takes away from the power and strength of African nations, but it also makes it less likely that Africans will be successful in many areas. The constant focus of Africa's problems makes it hard to see the amazing progress, innovations, and contributions that Africans have made in many fields, including science, arts, music, literature, agriculture, and business. Take, for example, the Ghanaian company Kantanka Automobiles, Using their craftsmanship and engineering know-how, they've made some of the best cars in Africa. But many potential customers don't buy local brands like Antanka because they think items made in Africa aren't as good as those made in other places. This lack of confidence comes from the idea that goods made in the West are automatically better. Because of this, some African companies try to sell more by putting made in China labels on their goods. This approach takes advantage of the wrong idea that things made outside Africa are automatically of better quality. In the same way, many tech companies in Africa have a hard time getting known and earning customers' trust because they are based on the African continent. Through constant and sometimes biased coverage, these media outlets have done a good job of making people think that goods and services from Africa aren't very good. So, Africans believe this themselves, which makes them like foreign goods more than support their own local industries. This keeps the inferiority complex alive, which is a sad fact that makes it harder for African countries to grow and become economically independent. So this really begs the question, who benefits from stereotyping the entire African continent and what do they gain from it? In fact, there's a complicated connection between NGOs and the idea that Africa is always in need of help. Many NGOs started out with the good purpose of helping people in need, but over time, they have become dependent on the story that Africa is always in need of help. NGOs often rely on the funds from well-intentioned people in Europe and America who are genuinely concerned about the plight of Africans. These organizations bring these funds to Africa to provide aid to communities that require assistance, which is a good objective. But as these NGOs learned more about the situation on the ground, they understood that Africa is not just a continent of helplessness. It is also a continent of resilience, innovation, and self-sufficiency. Some NGOs were in a tough spot because they needed to keep running and they needed money to do so. They knew that Africans had the ability to solve their own problems and grow on its own, but they had to keep telling people that Africans were always in need of help. By doing this, they could make sure that donors who believed in the goal of helping Africans would keep giving them money. In order to perpetuate the narrative, NGOs and large corporations involved in large precious mineral resources have strategically utilized news channels to selectively highlight the challenges faced by Africans. By carefully choosing which story to promote, they consistently reinforce the perception that the continent is in a perpetual state of decline and instability. By highlighting the challenges and difficulties faced by African nations, they have successfully promoted the notion that Africa is on the brink of collapse. This strategy has proven effective as a significant number of individuals outside of Africa have come to hold the belief that the continent is perpetually struggling and in dire need of assistance. However, this widespread perception does not reflect the complete truth about Africa. In fact, it is far from accurate. It is important to acknowledge that there are indeed communities in Africa that require assistance and face significant challenges. Poverty, inadequate healthcare, and a lack of access to education are issues that affect certain regions and vulnerable communities. But it is also important to remember that people in other parts of the world, like Europe, the United States, and Asia, face similar problems and need help. Yet, this simplistic and one-sided portrayal overlooks the diversity, resilience, and potential of African nations and creates a harmful stereotype that undermines the agency of self-determination of Africans. The NGOs and big corporations need this narrative going as long as they can. So what do they gain from this? Your guess is as good as mine. It's all in the name of profits. Which brings me to the last question. Is this narrative purely driven by racism? I understand that some individuals may perceive this discussion as an attempt to play the race card, but it is important to approach the topic with an open mind and consider the evidence presented. It is crucial to examine the broader context and the impact of media representation of Africa's perception. Visual media, like movies, can be a powerful tool for changing people's mind and making sure they believe certain things. Examining movies and documentaries about Africa can provide valuable insights into the prevailing narrative. While it is true that many of these productions tend to focus on poverty, slums, and struggles for survival, it is essential to crucially analyze the underlying message and consider the alternative perspective. Unfortunately, the persistence of such a narrative raises the question about the role of racism. Racism, rooted in historical prejudice and stereotypes, has had a profound impact on how Africa and its people are portrayed in the media. These biases create a harmful generalization, reinforce power imbalance, and marginalize the diverse cultures, achievements, and potential of African nations. Despite evidence to the contrary, such as Africa's resources, cultural heritage, and significant advancement in various fields, the prevailing narrative continues to shape public perception. Overcoming this narrative requires a collective effort to challenge and dismantle the underlying racist biases that contribute to its persistence. This can only start when African news channels, filmmakers, and social media influencers start telling positive stories about Africa instead of following the Western media's footsteps. We need to highlight the multitude of perceptions, achievements, and successes across Africa so that we can counterbalance the prevailing narrative and promote a more accurate and comprehensive understanding. This includes showcasing Africa's cultural contribution, technological innovation, scientific achievement, and economical growth, among other aspects. By doing so, we can contribute to a more equitable and inclusive representation of Africa that recognizes its complexities, dispels misconception, and celebrates the continent's diverse achievement and potential. This brings us to the end of this video. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.